The weight of assumptions. It was a crisp autumn morning at JFK International Airport, and the day seemed as ordinary as ever. Flight 742 from New York to Miami was fully booked, with travelers bustling through the terminal. Some moved with the urgency of tight schedules, while others meandered, enjoying the brief respite before boarding. Among them was Sarah Collins, a seasoned flight attendant with 6 years of experience under her belt. Known for her efficiency, Sarah had built a reputation as a no-nonsense professional who knew how to manage even the most challenging flights. Sarah enjoyed her job most days. There was something fulfilling about maintaining order in the chaos of air travel, ensuring that every passenger made it to their destination comfortably and safely. Yet, over the years, the repetitive nature of the job had dulled her enthusiasm. What once felt like a vibrant and exciting career had settled into routine monotony. For Sarah, the passengers were often just a sea of faces, each representing a task to complete, a drink to serve, a question to answer, or a seatbelt to check. As passengers began boarding, Sarah prepared herself for another long shift. She adjusted her uniform in the reflective surface of the overhead bins, tied her hair back tightly, and plastered on her customer service smile. It wasn't long before the first wave of passengers streamed in, many laden with oversized carry-ons and weary expressions. She greeted them with the practiced warmth that had become second nature, though her thoughts were already on the tasks ahead. Near the back of the line, a quiet, elderly couple shuffled forward, their pace unhurried amidst the hustle. Mr. Thompson, a tall man with thinning gray hair, held a small leather travel bag in one hand and guided his wife with the other. Mrs. Thompson, her petite frame draped in a simple beige cardigan, clutched a floral handbag. Despite her frailty, her eyes sparkled with warmth, and her smile carried a quiet grace. They moved slowly, whispering to each other as they navigated their way toward their assigned seats. Sarah watched them briefly but paid them no special attention. To her, they were just another pair of elderly passengers, the kind she often saw on flights to Florida. Retirees, most likely, heading south to visit family or escape the northern cold. She turned her focus to assisting a family struggling to fit a bulky stroller into the overhead compartment, then hurried to address the needs of a row of business-class passengers already making drink requests. When Sarah reached the Thompsons' row during her beverage service, Mrs. Thompson was holding the menu card, squinting as if trying to make out the small print. "Take your time," Sarah said automatically, though her tone carried a trace of impatience. She had a full cabin to attend to, and lingering too long at one row could derail her carefully planned routine. Mrs. Thompson smiled apologetically. "Oh dear, I'm just trying to decide what I'd like," she said softly, glancing at her husband for guidance. "We'll just have water for now," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady and polite. But Sarah, feeling the pressure of the bustling cabin behind her, responded more curtly than she intended. "I'll come back later. I have other passengers to serve first." Her words landed with a sharpness she didn't fully realize at the moment. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered, her hands lowering the menu card. Mr. Thompson's expression remained neutral, though a flicker of something unspoken passed between him and his wife. Sarah moved on without a second thought, her attention shifting to the next row. She didn't notice how the couple quietly resumed their conversation, or how their demeanor remained calm despite her dismissiveness. The flight carried on as expected, but a strange discomfort began to settle in Sarah's chest. Something about the Thompsons nagged at her. Perhaps it was their unassuming nature, or the way they had responded to her brusqueness with quiet grace. Most passengers would have shown at least a hint of annoyance, but the Thompsons had accepted her behavior without so much as a frown. Sarah shook off the feeling, telling herself that she had done nothing wrong. After all, she had a job to do, and efficiency was key on a fully booked flight. An hour into the journey, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. He made the usual announcements, weather conditions, expected arrival time, but then added a message that caught Sarah off guard. "Sarah Collins, please report to the cockpit immediately," he said, his tone unusually firm. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She exchanged a glance with her fellow flight attendant, who shrugged, equally puzzled. Leaving her tray on the counter, she made her way to the front of the plane, her mind racing with possibilities. Had she missed an important safety check? Was there an issue with a passenger complaint? She couldn't imagine what warranted being called to the cockpit mid-flight. When she arrived, the captain and her supervisor, Linda, were waiting for her in the galley. Linda's expression was serious, her arms crossed over her blazer. "Sarah, we need to talk about the couple in 14B and 14C, Linda said without preamble. Confused, Sarah furrowed her brow. "The Thompsons. What about them?" Linda handed her a tablet, its screen displaying a profile page. At the top of the page were the names James and Eleanor Thompson. Beneath their names was a list of accolades and affiliations, major shareholders, Atlantic Skies Airline, philanthropists, founders of the Thompson Foundation. The words blurred before Sarah's eyes as her stomach churned. She glanced up at Linda, hoping for some kind of explanation that would lessen the gravity of what she was reading. "They're not just passengers, Sarah," Linda said, her tone sharp. "They're VIP shareholders. The Thompsons have been with this airline since its inception. Their contributions have funded everything from new aircraft to employee benefits." The weight of her earlier behavior hit Sarah like a freight train. Her sharp words, her dismissive tone, all directed at two of the airline's most important patrons. Her hands trembled as she handed the tablet back to Linda. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's exactly the problem," Linda replied. "You didn't take the time to know." The ripple of realization. As Sarah stood in the galley, the weight of Linda's words hung heavily over her. The sound of the plane's engines droned in the background, a faint hum that seemed to amplify the tension in the small space. Her palms were clammy, and her chest felt tight. She replayed the earlier interaction with the Thompsons in her mind. Mrs. Thompson's faltering smile, Mr. Thompson's quiet nod. She had brushed them off without a second thought, treating them as if their presence was an inconvenience rather than a priority. Now, the magnitude of her mistake loomed before her. These weren't just ordinary passengers. They were the backbone of the airline's success. Their investments had likely helped keep her job secure, funded the equipment she used every day, and improved the experience of countless passengers. And she had dismissed them with an attitude that barely scratched the surface of professionalism. Linda's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Look, Sarah," she said, her voice low to avoid drawing attention from the passengers. "Mistakes happen, but when you're dealing with people like the Thompsons, a mistake isn't just a slip-up. It's a reflection of the entire airline. You need to fix this before we land." "How?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "What do I even say?" Linda tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Start with sincerity. They don't need grand gestures or excuses. They need to see that you understand the gravity of your actions and that you're willing to learn from them." With that, Linda walked away, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She glanced at the clock on the wall. There were still 2 hours left before the flight landed in Miami. 2 hours to figure out how to make amends with the Thompsons. Sarah returned to the cabin, her steps slower than usual. She couldn't bring herself to approach the couple just yet, not while the sting of embarrassment was so fresh. Instead, she focused on her usual tasks, serving drinks, collecting trash, and responding to the call buttons of other passengers. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, her gaze kept drifting to row 14. The Thompsons sat side by side, their heads bent over a small tablet. Mrs. Thompson was tapping gently on the screen, while Mr. Thompson adjusted his reading glasses and leaned in to watch. They appeared completely at ease, their quiet interaction a stark contrast to the storm raging in Sarah's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her. What if they had already decided to report her? What if they were typing up a formal complaint to send to corporate as soon as they landed? The thought made her stomach churn. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, Sarah took a deep breath and made her way to their row. She rehearsed her apology in her head as she approached, her heart pounding with each step. When she reached them, she forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'd like to apologize for the way I treated you earlier. I wasn't as patient or as respectful as I should have been, and I deeply regret my behavior." Mrs. Thompson looked up first, her kind eyes meeting Sarah's with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Mr. Thompson followed, his expression unreadable but calm. "I hope you can forgive me," Sarah continued, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "It wasn't fair of me to make assumptions, and I realize now how wrong I was." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched on, and Sarah felt her cheeks grow hot. She braced herself for a rebuke, but when Mr. Thompson finally spoke, his tone was gentle. "We appreciate your apology," he said, his voice steady. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her smile returning. "It's easy to get caught up in the business of the job," she added, "but it's the little moments of kindness that make all the difference." Their graciousness caught Sarah off guard. She had expected anger or disappointment, but instead they offered her understanding. It was both a relief and a lesson, one she hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll make sure this never happens again." As she walked away, a strange mix of emotions swirled within her. She felt both humbled and determined, as though the Thompsons' quiet grace had ignited something in her. For the rest of the flight, she threw herself into her work with renewed focus, treating each passenger with care and attention, no matter how small their request. But the true impact of the encounter didn't hit Sarah until the plane touched down in Miami. As passengers began to disembark, she stood near the exit, bidding them goodbye with her usual smile. When the Thompsons reached her, Mrs. Thompson paused, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "Don't be too hard on yourself," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Mistakes are opportunities to grow. The important thing is what you choose to do next." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with unspoken gratitude. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. As the Thompsons walked away, Sarah felt a strange sense of clarity. The flight might have ended, but her journey was just beginning. She had been given a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it, not just for the Thompsons, but for herself and every passenger she would serve in the future. The mirror of accountability. The Miami sun cast a warm glow over the airport as Sarah watched the Thompsons disappear into the crowd. Their parting words lingered in her mind like an echo, weaving through her thoughts as she disembarked and made her way through the staff exit. She couldn't shake the realization that this wasn't just about a simple apology or a fleeting mistake. It was about who she wanted to be and how she wanted to show up in her role and in life. By the time Sarah returned home that evening, exhaustion had settled over her, both physical and emotional. She kicked off her heels, sank onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling. The events of the day played on a loop in her mind. Her curt dismissal of the Thompsons, the captain's shocking revelation, their gracious acceptance of her apology. Every detail was magnified now, every word dissected in her memory. She reached for her laptop, determined to learn more about the Thompsons. A quick search revealed a wealth of information. James and Eleanor Thompson weren't just shareholders. They were legends in the airline industry. Their philanthropic endeavors had transformed lives worldwide, from funding education programs to spearheading disaster relief efforts. They weren't just wealthy. They were purposeful, using their resources to create meaningful change. As Sarah read about their contributions, a pang of guilt stabbed at her. How had she overlooked the humanity in front of her? She realized that her assumptions, rooted in impatience and her own frustrations, had blinded her to their quiet dignity. The more she learned, the more determined she became to turn this experience into something positive. A new day, a new perspective. The following day, Sarah arrived at the airport earlier than usual. Her colleagues noticed her unusual quietness as she went through the pre-flight briefing, but she brushed off their questions with a small smile. Today was different. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was determined to be fully present. Flight 523 to Denver was a mid-morning departure, and the passengers filing into the cabin reflected a typical mix: business professionals, families, and solo travelers. Sarah greeted each person with a genuine smile, no longer just a reflex, but a conscious choice. She paid closer attention to their expressions, their body language, and the subtle hints of emotion in their voices. Toward the middle of the boarding process, Sarah noticed an elderly man struggling to fit his carry-on into the overhead compartment. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to angle the bag. Frustration and embarrassment etched across his face. Sarah moved quickly, stepping in with a gentle touch. "Let me help you with that," she said warmly, taking the bag and securing it in the compartment. The man looked at her, startled, and then smiled. "Thank you," he said, his voice tinged with relief. "I usually manage just fine, but today seems to be one of those days." Sarah nodded, her smile unwavering. "We all have those days," she replied. "If you need anything else during the flight, just let me know." As she continued down the aisle, she realized something remarkable. Small moments like this didn't just make the passengers' experience better. They made her feel more connected to the people she served. Each interaction, no matter how brief, carried weight. It was a chance to make someone's day a little brighter. A difficult passenger. Halfway through the flight, Sarah encountered a challenge that would have tested her patience on any other day. A middle-aged man in the front row was loudly complaining about the temperature in the cabin. His voice carried over the hum of the engines, drawing disapproving glances from nearby passengers. "This is unacceptable," he said, his face flushed with irritation. "I paid for comfort, not a freezer." Sarah approached him calmly, crouching slightly to meet his eye level. "I'm so sorry you're feeling uncomfortable," she said, her tone measured. "Let me see what I can do to make it better for you." The man crossed his arms, clearly unsatisfied. "I don't want excuses. I want action." In the past, Sarah might have felt defensive or annoyed, but today, she approached the situation differently. "I understand," she said. "Would you like a blanket or perhaps a hot drink? I want to make sure you're as comfortable as possible." Her willingness to listen and respond without escalating the tension seemed to disarm him. After a moment, he sighed and nodded. "A blanket would be nice." Sarah retrieved the blanket and a cup of hot tea, placing them on his tray table with a genuine smile. "If there's anything else you need, just let me know." The man muttered a quiet "thank you," and the tension dissipated. As Sarah walked away, she felt a small swell of pride. She had turned a potentially negative encounter into a moment of connection, simply by choosing patience and empathy. Reflection in the quiet moments. During the lull in the flight, Sarah found herself staring out the window of the galley, the endless stretch of clouds below reflecting her thoughts. She thought about the Thompsons again, about their quiet grace and the way they had handled her mistake with kindness instead of anger. What would they think if they saw her now, going out of her way to serve with humility and care? It wasn't just about redeeming herself in their eyes anymore. It was about living up to the potential they had seen in her. They hadn't berated her or called for her punishment. They had trusted her to learn from the experience. That trust, Sarah realized, was a gift. A chance to become better not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. Her introspection was interrupted by a soft voice. "Excuse me, miss." She turned to see a young girl standing in the galley, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. Her wide eyes were filled with curiosity and a hint of nervousness. "I can't find my mommy," the girl said, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, offering her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she said. "We'll find her together." Taking the girl's hand, Sarah led her down the aisle, scanning the rows for a frantic parent. It didn't take long to locate the mother, who had been searching frantically near the restroom. The woman's face lit up with relief as she spotted her daughter. "Thank you so much," the mother said, her voice thick with emotion as she hugged her child tightly. "It's no trouble at all," Sarah replied, her heart swelling with warmth. Moments like these reminded her of the human connections that made her job so meaningful. A letter from the Thompsons. As the flight landed and the passengers disembarked, Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment that had been missing for a long time. She knew she still had a long way to go in her journey, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. When she returned to her locker after the flight, she found an envelope resting on the shelf. Her name was written on the front in elegant cursive. She opened it, her breath catching as she recognized the signature at the bottom of the letter. James and Eleanor Thompson. The letter was brief, but powerful. "Dear Sarah, we wanted to thank you for taking the time to reflect on your actions and for reaching out to us with sincerity. It's not often that people take accountability in the way that you have, and it speaks volumes about your character. We believe in second chances, not just because they're deserved, but because they give people the opportunity to grow. Watching you take this experience and turn it into something positive has been truly inspiring. Keep moving forward, Sarah. The world needs more people like you, people who are willing to learn, to grow, and to make a difference, one small act at a time. Warm regards, James and Eleanor Thompson." As Sarah read the letter, tears welled in her eyes. She clutched the note to her chest, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the impact she could have on others. She vowed to carry the Thompsons' message with her in every interaction, every flight, and every choice she made moving forward. The ripple of change. The letter from the Thompsons became a touchstone for Sarah, a constant reminder of the power of humility and accountability. She carried it with her in her flight bag, tucked into a small pocket where it would be safe. Whenever she felt herself slipping back into old habits, moments of impatience, frustration, or self-doubt, she would take a moment to reread their words. It was like a compass, guiding her toward the kind of person she wanted to be. A few weeks had passed since that fateful flight, and Sarah was slowly but steadily building new habits. Her colleagues had noticed the change. During morning briefings, she was more engaged, offering thoughtful input rather than just nodding along. On flights, she was more attentive, pausing to listen to passengers rather than rushing through her tasks. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and that effort didn't go unnoticed. A new opportunity. One afternoon, Sarah was called into her supervisor, Linda's office. The summons was unexpected, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of nerves as she made her way down the corridor. The last time she had been in this office, it was to discuss her mistake with the Thompsons. What could it be this time? When she entered, Linda greeted her with a small smile. "Take a seat, Sarah," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. Sarah sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Is everything okay?" Linda leaned forward, clasping her hands on the desk. "More than okay," she said. "I've been keeping an eye on you these past few weeks, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've shown real growth since the incident with the Thompsons. It's clear that you've taken their feedback to heart." Sarah felt a flush of gratitude but remained silent, unsure of where the conversation was heading. Linda continued, "We have a special program coming up, a mentorship initiative for new flight attendants. It's designed to pair experienced staff with newcomers to help them navigate the challenges of the job. I think you'd be a great fit as a mentor." The words took Sarah by surprise. A mentor? Just weeks ago, she had been grappling with her own shortcomings, unsure if she was even worthy of her position. Now, Linda was asking her to guide others. The idea was both thrilling and daunting. "Me? Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Linda chuckled. "Absolutely. Who better to teach others about the importance of humility, patience, and connection? You've lived it, Sarah. You know what it means to make mistakes and learn from them. That's exactly the kind of perspective our new recruits need." For a moment, Sarah hesitated, doubt creeping in. But then she thought of the Thompsons and their unwavering belief in second chances. If they could trust her to grow, maybe she could trust herself to lead. "I'd be honored," she said finally, her voice steady with resolve. Mentorship begins. The mentorship program kicked off a few weeks later. Sarah was paired with a young recruit named Emily, who was fresh out of training and full of nervous energy. Emily reminded Sarah of herself when she first started, eager to prove herself, but prone to overthinking every little detail. Their first flight together was a short hop from New York to Boston, a route Sarah knew like the back of her hand. As they prepared the cabin, Sarah noticed Emily fumbling with the beverage cart, her hands shaking slightly as she arranged the cups and napkins. "Take a deep breath," Sarah said gently, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "You've got this. It's okay to take your time." Emily looked up, her wide eyes filled with gratitude. "Thanks," she said. "I just don't want to mess up." Sarah smiled. "Trust me, we all mess up. What matters is how we handle it. If you make a mistake, own it, learn from it, and move on. The passengers will remember how you made them feel, not whether you poured their coffee perfectly." Throughout the flight, Sarah guided Emily with patience and encouragement, stepping in when needed but allowing her the space to find her own rhythm. By the time they landed, Emily's confidence had visibly grown. She even managed to crack a joke with a passenger, earning a round of laughter from the nearby rows. "You did great," Sarah told her as they disembarked. "I'm proud of you." Emily beamed, her nervousness replaced with a newfound sense of assurance. "Thank you, Sarah. I couldn't have done it without you." The unseen impact. As Sarah continued mentoring Emily and other new recruits, she began to see the ripple effect of her own transformation. The lessons she had learned from the Thompsons were spreading through her actions, influencing not only her own behavior, but also the culture of her team. She noticed small but significant changes: colleagues being more patient with each other, passengers receiving a warmer welcome, and a general sense of camaraderie that hadn't been there before. One day, while preparing for a long-haul flight to London, Sarah overheard Emily talking to another recruit in the break room. The recruit, a young man named Carlos, was voicing his frustration about a difficult passenger he had dealt with on his last flight. "It's so frustrating," Carlos said, throwing up his hands. "No matter what I did, they just wouldn't stop complaining." Emily nodded sympathetically. "I know it's tough, but Sarah taught me something that really helped. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. If you show people that you're trying your best and that you care, that's what they'll remember." Sarah paused, her heart swelling with pride. Emily's words were a reflection of her own journey, a testament to how far she had come. The Thompsons' kindness had sparked a change in her, and now that spark was spreading to others. A surprise reunion. Months later, Sarah was assigned to a high-profile flight from Los Angeles to New York. As she reviewed the passenger manifest, her heart skipped a beat when she saw two familiar names: James and Eleanor Thompson. The flight was a special one, catering to prominent figures in the business world, and the Thompsons were attending an industry conference in New York. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for their arrival. When the Thompsons boarded, Sarah greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. They smiled back, their eyes reflecting the same kindness she remembered. "Hello, Sarah," Mrs. Thompson said. "It's good to see you again." Throughout the flight, Sarah ensured they were comfortable, checking in regularly without being overbearing. When the plane landed, the Thompsons lingered as the other passengers disembarked. "You've come a long way, Sarah," Mr. Thompson said, his tone full of quiet pride. "It's clear that you've taken our words to heart." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. "I have," she said, "and I can't thank you enough for the lesson you taught me. It's changed everything." Mrs. Thompson placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "Keep paying it forward," she said with a smile. "You're making a difference, one person at a time." As they walked away, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey wasn't over, but she knew she was on the right path. The Thompsons' belief in her had set her on a course of growth and transformation, and now she was determined to pass that belief on to others. The weight of influence. Months passed, and Sarah's newfound approach to her job became second nature. She didn't realize how much she had changed until she noticed her colleagues gravitating toward her for advice, not just about the technicalities of the job, but about how to handle the emotional challenges that came with it. Whether it was an irate passenger, a tense situation in the cabin, or personal stress spilling into the workday, Sarah had become a calm and reassuring presence, a leader in her own right. A new challenge. One morning, during a briefing for a transatlantic flight to London, Sarah's supervisor, Linda, introduced a special passenger who would be on board. A young boy named Liam was traveling with his parents, but this wasn't an ordinary trip for their family. Liam was battling a rare illness, and this flight was the beginning of their journey to seek a new and experimental treatment in the UK. The briefing emphasized that while the family hadn't requested any special treatment, the crew should be prepared to assist in any way possible. Sarah felt a pang of emotion as Linda described the situation. It reminded her of the lessons she had learned from the Thompsons, to see the humanity in every passenger and to offer kindness without reservation. When Sarah met Liam and his parents during boarding, her heart swelled. Liam was small for his age, with pale skin and wide, curious eyes. Despite his frailty, he had a bright smile that lit up the cabin as he waved to the crew. "Hello, Liam," Sarah said, crouching down to his level. "I'm Sarah, and I'll be here to make sure you have the best flight ever. Do you like flying?" Liam nodded enthusiastically. "It's like being in a spaceship, right?" he said, his voice filled with excitement. "Exactly like a spaceship," Sarah replied, grinning. "And you're the captain today. If you need anything, just let me know." His parents smiled gratefully, and Sarah could see the strain etched into their faces. It was clear they had been through a lot, and this flight was just one step in a long and uncertain journey. Moments of care. Throughout the flight, Sarah kept a close eye on Liam and his family, making sure they were comfortable and attended to without feeling overwhelmed. She brought Liam a small set of wings the airline gave out to children, telling him it was his captain's badge. His face lit up as he pinned it proudly to his shirt. When turbulence hit halfway through the flight, Sarah noticed that Liam's mother looked particularly tense, gripping the armrest as her husband whispered reassurances. Sarah approached quietly, kneeling beside her. "Turbulence can feel a little scary, but it's perfectly normal," Sarah said gently. "Think of it like bumps on the road. It might feel shaky, but the plane is built to handle it." Liam's mother exhaled shakily, nodding. "Thank you. I guess I'm just on edge." "That's completely understandable," Sarah replied. "If there's anything I can do to make this easier for you, please let me know." The woman smiled, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Just knowing someone cares makes all the difference. A lesson in gratitude. As the flight neared its end, Sarah took a moment to reflect on how far she had come. In the past, she might have viewed Liam and his family as just another task, something to be checked off her list. But now, she saw them for who they were, a family holding on to hope in the face of adversity. When the plane landed in London, Liam's parents lingered for a moment as the other passengers disembarked. They approached Sarah, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. "You've been wonderful," Liam's father said, shaking her hand. "This has been a stressful time for us, but your kindness made this flight so much easier." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "It's been an honor to have you all on board," she said. "I'll be keeping Liam in my thoughts." As the family walked away, Sarah felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to touch lives, even in small, fleeting ways. Recognition in unexpected places. 2 weeks after the flight, Sarah received an email from Linda. The subject line read, "Passenger feedback." Curious, Sarah opened the message and was stunned by what she saw. It was a letter from Liam's parents, expressing their gratitude for the care and attention Sarah had shown during their flight. "She made our son feel special," the letter read. "In a time when so much feels uncertain, Sarah's kindness reminded us that there is still good in the world. Please let her know how much she meant to us." The email left Sarah speechless. She had simply done what felt right. But to Liam's family, it had meant the world. It was a reminder that the smallest gestures, an encouraging word, a thoughtful act, could ripple outward in ways she might never fully understand. A conversation with Linda. Later that week, Linda called Sarah into her office again. This time, there was no tension in the air, only warmth. "You've been making waves, Sarah," Linda said with a smile. "Between the mentorship program and feedback from passengers like Liam's family, it's clear that you've become a real leader on this team." Sarah felt a swell of pride but remained humble. "I've just been trying to do my best," she said. "The Thompsons taught me that every interaction matters, and I've been trying to live by that." Linda nodded. "And it shows. In fact, we've decided to nominate you for the airline's annual Excellence in Service Award. It's a prestigious recognition, and I can't think of anyone more deserving." Sarah was stunned. The same person who had once dismissed the Thompsons with impatience was now being celebrated for her service. It felt like a full-circle moment, a testament to the power of growth and second chances. The ripple effect. As Sarah left Linda's office, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. It wasn't just about the recognition or the accolades, it was about the lives she had touched along the way. From the Thompsons to Emily to Liam and his family, each interaction had been a step toward becoming the person she wanted to be. The ripple of change didn't stop with her. It extended to her colleagues, her passengers, and even the people they interacted with. It was a reminder that kindness and empathy weren't just fleeting acts. They were seeds that could grow into something far greater. That evening, Sarah sat down with her laptop and composed an email to the Thompsons. She wanted them to know the impact they had made, how their quiet grace and forgiveness had set her on a path of transformation. The legacy of kindness. Weeks passed after Sarah learned of her nomination for the airline's Excellence in Service Award. The recognition filled her with pride, but it also deepened her commitment to living out the lessons she had learned. It wasn't about the award itself. It was about honoring the people who had shaped her journey, especially the Thompsons. As the day of the award ceremony approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on her transformation. She thought about her early days as a flight attendant, when she had approached the job with efficiency but little empathy. She thought about the mistakes she had made, most notably her dismissive treatment of the Thompsons. And she thought about the ripple effects of their kindness, the way their grace and forgiveness had inspired her to change. The ceremony. The ceremony was held in a grand ballroom at one of the city's most prestigious hotels. The room was filled with airline executives, crew members, and honorees from various departments. Sarah sat at a table near the front, her heart pounding as she scanned the room. When her name was announced as the recipient of the Excellence in Service Award, Sarah rose from her seat to a round of applause. She made her way to the stage, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted the plaque. The spotlight was bright, but it was the warmth of the applause that truly overwhelmed her. As she stood at the podium, she took a deep breath. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. "I'm deeply honored to receive this award, but the truth is, this isn't just about me. It's about the people who taught me what service really means." She paused, her eyes scanning the audience. "A few months ago, I made a mistake, one that could have cost me my career. But instead of anger or punishment, I was met with kindness and grace. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, if you're here tonight, I want to thank you for showing me the power of humility and forgiveness. Your actions reminded me that service isn't just about completing tasks. It's about connecting with people, seeing their humanity, and treating them with the respect they deserve." The room was silent, save for the occasional sniffle. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "This experience has taught me that every interaction matters. Whether it's helping a passenger with a heavy bag, comforting a nervous flyer, or simply offering a genuine smile, these small acts have the power to create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. I've seen those ripples in my colleagues, in my passengers, and even in myself. And for that, I am truly grateful. As she stepped down from the podium, the applause was thunderous. Sarah returned to her seat, her heart full. But the surprises of the evening weren't over yet. An unexpected visit. After the ceremony, as Sarah mingled with her colleagues and accepted congratulations, she noticed a familiar couple approaching her. Her breath caught as she recognized the Thompsons. They were dressed impeccably, their expressions warm and proud. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Sarah exclaimed, her voice a mix of surprise and joy. "Sarah," Mrs. Thompson said, reaching out to take her hands. "You've done us proud." That speech was beautiful. Mr. Thompson nodded. "We always knew you had it in you," he said. "You just needed the right nudge." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I can't thank you enough," she said. "Your kindness changed everything for me. I don't know where I'd be without it." Mrs. Thompson smiled. "That's the thing about kindness. It's meant to be shared, and you've done that beautifully." The three of them talked for a while, reminiscing about the flight that had started it all. Sarah shared stories of her growth, from mentoring new recruits to her interactions with passengers like Liam. The Thompsons listened intently, their faces lighting up with each anecdote. Before they parted ways, Mrs. Thompson handed Sarah a small envelope. "This is for you," she said. "A little something to remind you of the difference you're making." Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Sarah, true service comes from the heart. You've not only embraced that truth, but have also inspired others to do the same. Keep shining your light. It's brighter than you know. With gratitude, James and Eleanor Thompson." Sarah held the note close, feeling the weight of its words. It wasn't just a message. It was a testament to the journey she had taken. A journey that was far from over. A legacy begins. The months following the ceremony brought new challenges and opportunities. Sarah continued mentoring new recruits, her team growing stronger and more cohesive with each passing day. She also began leading workshops for her colleagues, sharing her experiences and the lessons she had learned. One day, Emily approached Sarah with an idea. "Why don't we start a program to recognize acts of kindness among the crew?" she suggested. "Something simple, like a monthly shout-out for people who go above and beyond." Sarah loved the idea and worked with Emily to bring it to life. The program, called Wings of Kindness, became a hit. Crew members began sharing stories of small but meaningful acts. A flight attendant who stayed late to help a nervous passenger, a pilot who wrote a note to a child in the cockpit, a team member who went out of their way to assist an elderly traveler. The stories inspired the entire airline, creating a culture of compassion and connection. A full circle moment. One evening after a particularly long flight, Sarah received an email that brought tears to her eyes. It was from Liam's parents. They wanted to let her know that the treatment had gone well and that Liam was on the road to recovery. Attached was a photo of Liam, wearing the captain's wings she had given him, his smile as bright as ever. Sarah replied immediately, her heart full of gratitude. As she hit send, she realized how much her life had changed since that day with the Thompsons. Their kindness had been the spark, but it was up to her to carry the flame. And she did. Sarah's story became a beacon for others, proving that even the smallest acts of compassion could create ripples of change. Whether she was in the air or on the ground, she carried the lessons she had learned with her, leaving a legacy of kindness wherever she went. The journey's end and a new beginning. The unexpected gift. The morning after the ceremony, Sarah was back at the airport, preparing for another flight. Her award was tucked safely in her locker, a quiet reminder of how far she had come. As she went through her pre-flight routine, she received a call from Linda. "Sarah, can you stop by my office before your flight? There's something I want to share with you." Curious, Sarah made her way to Linda's office. When she arrived, Linda was holding an envelope with a golden airline crest embossed on the front. "This came for you this morning," Linda said, handing it to her with a knowing smile. Sarah opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter from the airline CEO, congratulating her on her Excellence in Service Award and inviting her to join a newly formed advisory committee. The committee's mission was to improve passenger experience across the airline, and they wanted Sarah to be a part of it. "This is incredible," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know what to say." Linda grinned. "Say yes. You've earned this, Sarah. Your work speaks for itself." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with pride. It was another step forward, another opportunity to make a difference, not just for herself, but for her colleagues and the passengers they served. A reunion in the skies. A few weeks later, Sarah found herself on a flight to Los Angeles, one of the routes she had worked countless times before. The cabin was full, the chatter of passengers blending with the hum of the engines. As Sarah moved down the aisle, she noticed a familiar face in first class. Mrs. Thompson. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen the Thompsons since the award ceremony. Mrs. Thompson was alone this time, seated by the window with a book in her lap. When she looked up and saw Sarah, her face broke into a warm smile. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said, her voice bright with surprise. "It's wonderful to see you again." "It's good to see you too, Sarah," Mrs. Thompson replied. "James couldn't make this trip, but I couldn't pass up the chance to visit my granddaughter." As the flight progressed, Sarah made sure to check in with Mrs. Thompson frequently, but it wasn't until the final stretch of the journey that they had a chance to talk. With most passengers dozing or engrossed in their in-flight entertainment, Sarah sat down beside her. "How have you been?" Sarah asked. "It's been a while since the ceremony." Mrs. Thompson smiled. "We've been well, dear, and I've been keeping an eye on you. Your work with the mentorship program and the kindness initiative has been inspiring." Sarah felt a warm blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. "It's all thanks to the lesson you and Mr. Thompson taught me. You changed the way I see everything." Mrs. Thompson reached over and took Sarah's hand. "You changed yourself, Sarah. We just gave you a little nudge. The rest was all you." Full circle. The flight landed smoothly in Los Angeles, and Sarah walked Mrs. Thompson to the jet bridge. Before parting ways, Mrs. Thompson handed Sarah a small envelope. "This is something James and I wanted you to have," she said. "It's not much, but we thought it might help you as you continue to make a difference." Curious but touched, Sarah accepted the envelope and thanked Mrs. Thompson. Once she was back in the crew area, she opened it. Inside was a check with a significant amount, along with a handwritten note. "Dear Sarah, we believe in investing in people who have the courage to grow and inspire others. Use this however you see fit, to support your initiatives, to learn something new, or simply to take care of yourself. Keep making the world a kinder place. With love, James and Eleanor Thompson." Sarah stared at the check, overwhelmed by their generosity. She thought about all the ways she could use it, not for herself, but to expand the Wings of Kindness program, to create new opportunities for her colleagues, and to continue spreading the lessons she had learned. The legacy of kindness. Years later, Sarah would look back on that day as a turning point, a moment that solidified her purpose. The Wings of Kindness program became a cornerstone of the airline's culture, inspiring similar initiatives across the industry. Sarah's role on the advisory committee allowed her to shape policies that prioritized empathy and connection, ensuring that every passenger felt valued. As for Sarah, she continued to grow, not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. She became a mentor, a leader, and most importantly, a source of light for those around her. The lessons the Thompsons had taught her, the importance of humility, the power of forgiveness, and the ripple effect of small acts of kindness remained at the heart of everything she did. The Thompsons stayed in touch, their relationship evolving from passengers and crew to cherished friends. Sarah often thought about their quiet grace and the way they had changed her life. She knew she would never be able to repay them fully, but she honored them in the best way she could, by paying their kindness forward, every day, in every way. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.